Good morrow, popcorn junkies, welcome. This is a review of the Outrun, a new movie, came out a couple of weeks ago here in the UK, starring Saoirse Ronan, Paapa Essiedu, Stephen Dillane is in there, Saskia Reeves, she's in there, Nabil Elouahabi. This is a film based on the book by Amy Liptrot of the same name. And a lot of you, or a number of you, have kind of contacted us and said, are you going to be seeing this? You know, you're a nearly 20 years sober, recovering alcoholic. This is about sobriety. This is about recovery. I bought this book to read, just didn't get round to it. I think Nanny Di, my mother, might have read it. And the reason I bought it was because I thought, oh yes, I want to anything about kind of heading off to the Orkneys, the wilderness and the highlands or the islands of Scotland in order to kind of get to grips with one's sobriety, what not to like or what not to be interested in. We've talked a lot over the years about sobriety, mental health, etc. The 12-step recovery program, the serenity prayer, going into rehab, all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot about this that obviously would speak to me and Nadia and our family as a whole. This is a film. It's directed by Nora Fingscheidt. I don't necessarily know Nora Fingscheidt. As I say, it's set in Scotland, and it's a non-linear. I mean, I'm not too sure if the book follows the same sort of. I think it does follows the same sort of structure. It's a non-linear account of Saoirse Ronan's character. It's sort of autobiographical, so I presume it's based on Amy Liptrot's life, and it's about her sort of. It's a sort of, as I say, a non-linear cutting back and forth across the drunk years, the non-sober years, the drinking years, the drugging years, intercut with her life back up in the Orkneys. She kind of comes from the Orkneys and then she leaves, goes to London, lives the life, you know, in her 20s and her 30s, finds love. Drink, drugs, takes its hold, and then she returns to the Orkneys, and it's in the Orkneys, and then even going to a more kind of, if you like, sort of wild, abandoned, even more isolated version of the Orkneys she grew up in. She goes there to kind of, you know, find her sobriety and commune with herself and essentially go into a sort of hermit-like existence in a hut on a hill, battered by the wind. The danger, I think, with any film that is about alcoholism, rock bottoms, hitting your rock bottoms and coming back is that unfortunately, and in fact this is one of the some of the problems that one faces in talking about it on social media and revisiting it is that it can quite quickly run the risk or fall foul of cliche, of pretty much saying the same thing time and again. I mean, there's the infamous line in here somewhere after an AA meeting at some point where someone is asked, you know, you've got 18 years sobriety, when people say to me, you know, it does it get any easier? And there was a great quote in this film, which I've heard before, which is, it's not that it gets any easier, it just gets less hard. And I think that's an interesting point, because really sobriety is all about the day, keeping it in the day. So how does this film go about it? Does it pass the test of not falling foul of cliche after cliche after cliche? I think its non-linear structure helps. It's a curious film. It's 2 hours long, or nearly 2 hours long. It's quite disjointed. And I think there's a good reason for that, because no journey through alcohol and alcoholism is neat, nor is it coherent in any way, shape or form. It follows a pretty standard, you know, here she is, Saoirse Ronan, sort of in the Orkneys. Here she is back in London, sort of, you know, developing a relationship with Paapa Essiedu's character. And then she's out drinking too much, and then she regrets drinking too much, you know, putting herself in vulnerable positions. It wasn't at all, what's the word, gratuitous or prurient. It showed in a very sort of, I thought, economic way, without being too explicit, the cost and the price of drinking and the price of drugging. But it also did, I thought, quite a good job of showing the allure, actually. You know, some of the clubbing scenes, you know, all of the kind of scenes of drinking, drugging, partying, they're not all just presented as kind of bleak and depressing and ending in carnage and chaos, though they would. There was also a sort of sheen and a sort of euphoria to them, and you know, the film goes to great lengths to use dance music to kind of trigger, in a sense, that euphoric recall, which is a part of drinking. And in fact, my relationship with dance music, I used to love dance music. Well, I still do love dance music. I have to be absolutely in the right frame of mind to be able to listen to it. Not that it could take me to go and have a drink or make me have a drink, but I get such euphoric recall that I find it causes anxiety, because one kind of almost feels one's back in that kind of way kind of sort of place. And this film uses music in that way, both as flashback material, but also in the more sort of present rehab scenes where she's essentially wandering lonely as a cloud around the Orkneys. She's often listening to the music on her headphones as she moves around the landscape. So whilst on the one hand it shows the drinking and the drugging in quite not in a sort of glamorous as in desirable kind of way, but it's honest in that it says, this can be good, this can be fun. There's a reason why young adults would be drawn to this, and I think it's especially rammed home the reason Saoirse Ronan's character would have been drawn to this kind of life, because she actually grew up in the Orkneys. And I think this is what's kind of ironic, and I've needed a bit of time to kind of make sense of this, because if there was one part of the film I struggled with whilst watching it, was its distinction between her growing up on the Orkneys with her dad, who has bipolar, played by Stephen Dillane, her mum, who finds God and creates a church. They pray in her lounge and all this kind of stuff. She finds religion in a big way. The Saskia Reeves, her mum. So she came from this, and that's quite a good, after seeing the film and having spent a week or so thinking about the film, that's interesting, because in a weird way she kind of escaped the drudgery and the boredom and the dullness of life for a young person up here in Orkney, and she escaped her family with all of the kind of stress and distress, and we see flashbacks of her witnessing her father having bipolar highs and lows. She can't wake him, her mother having to deal with his violence and his kind of temper and all that kind of stuff, and you're in this bleak landscape where you're like, fucking hell, there's absolutely nothing to do as a child or as a young teenager, what have you. So it makes sense of her finding this freedom, and then this freedom spilling into addiction. And I think that's a really important thing to say, is that for so many people, it is a lottery. You could, the amount of times I get asked, or people say to me, is there any way you can tell if I'm an alcoholic, or what's the defining feature? What's going to lead you to? Are there sort of markers in the road in your journey that would make you go, yeah, that's where? No, unfortunately not. Drink is prevalent everywhere. Drugs are prevalent everywhere. It is truly a lottery. It's a lottery as to who, in indulging in these things, will get caught by the addiction and be unable be unable to control it, be able to kind of curtail it, be able to step away from it destroying their lives. And who knows whether that's about an endemic aspect of your personality, or whether it's just, a number of really unfortunate circumstances or moments in your life conspiring at all the wrong formative moments to make you more inclined to double down on drinking more and more and more. I personally think, just as everyone, people often say, everyone's got a book in them. I think everyone's got an alcoholic in them. I think everyone's got an addict in them. I think if you throw at anyone the wrong set of circumstances, the wrong location, the wrong relationships, all these kind of things, and then throw at them the availability of drink, etc., or drugs, I think everyone has the possibility to be an addict. So I don't think there's this kind of, you're preordained or you're one particular type of person. I think what's interesting about this film is, whilst it makes sense of her becoming an addict, and you see that, it also doesn't shy away from showing the fun and the euphoria of getting high and all that kind of stuff, and beautifully shot sequences, incredibly close up, which I always like. Big ECUs of faces of her and Paapa Essiedu, who he himself is beautiful, she's astonishing. At times this film is quite abstract. It's almost like an art installation where you're being buffeted by the sounds of both clubs and nightlife and love and love making, and then you're kind of buffeted by the sounds of the winds in Orkney, etc. And then essentially the film is also about her rehab arc. We see her and witness her going into AA meetings. She tries to get sober. Some really neat scenes with another sort of co-alcoholic or co-addict played by Nabil Elouahabi. He was great. It was really really gritty, really authentic, real, sort of co-addict, if you like. And then you have this kind of curiosity that she goes to the Orkney Isles to get sober, or to stay sober. It's almost like she goes on a migration. It's like a religious migration. She goes on an odyssey into herself. She needs to almost take away all of the kind of vestiges of normal life. She needs to strip things absolutely back, and she needs to park herself on a windy bluff. Is that right? A windy bluff? And just be faced with herself. Now, the part of this that it's not believable, but I think one of the things that's dangerous with this, and me and Nadia felt this when we watched it, is it was so bleak. There were times where I was thinking, good God, if anything was going to drive you to drink, it was perhaps the absolute bleakness of the landscape, the weather, the relentless rain and wind, and whilst the landscape is wild and rural, it's not, and I think this is a curious decision. I think this is a conscious decision with the filmmaking. It's not shown in a beatific fashion. I mean, there's crashing waves. We see lots of seals. There's a lot of kind of wildlife in this. One of the kind of jobs she takes on whilst in Orkney is she becomes a member of the RSPB. The way I cope with alcoholism and addiction is to have an incredible, I'm not saying it's an incredible sense of humour. I can be incredibly gallows, as in incredibly dark, incredibly bleak about addiction. And for me, looking at this, I was thinking, well, it's no fucking wonder she was an alcoholic. Look at the landscape, look at the options. She even joins the RSPB and can't even find the bird that they're looking to monitor that's incredibly rare, that flies from all over the world and should come here at this. And she's marking that off. There's not even one of them. It's so boring. Her dad, Stephen Dillane, who I think he was brilliant, actually. Her dad played this bipolar farmer who had his manias, his highs were sensationally kind of motivating and very well observed. And of course, his crashing lows, his immobilization. I've been there in that state before, though I'm sure it looks like he has bipolar 1. I think I have bipolar 2, though there can at times be a bleeding between the two. You really bought into this idea, and the film speaks to this idea of, is addiction hereditary? Is the mental health condition of what goes on for you hereditary? And I think this film did a great thing of, it didn't talk about it consciously, but there's a moment as she becomes, sober, and as she recovers, and as she moves through rehab, Saoirse Ronan's character starts to reconnect herself with her own learning around biology. She becomes excited by the biological kind of potentials of seaweed and seaweed research. And there's a scene where she's talking to her mum, where she's so sort of driven and fizzing and kind of ambitious, and she's talking with such a sort of almost bipolar-esque mania. And Saskia Reeves' character, her mum, it's a really neat job, because by this point, in later life, her parents have split up. But Saskia Reeves is looking almost alarmed of her daughter, thinking, oh my God, is this a sign like her dad's bipolar? Is she struggling with the same thing? And I thought the same thing. I thought, oh my God, she's got the same mania as her dad. Is bipolar at the base of alcoholism? Because one of the things that people don't realise is so many people who become alcoholics, who become addicts, when you dig into their sort of, psychotherapy, psychiatry, the diagnostics, more often than not, most people with an addiction or substance abuse issue are struggling and suffering with other conditions, right down to things like ADHD. Drugs can be a way of managing or numbing or neutering, really kind of difficult emotions. And it was interesting because I think possibly Saoirse Ronan's character has that bit of her dad in her, but is she bipolar, or is this just in sobriety? She finds her passion again. It avoided, I think, the sentimentalism of, as soon as you're sober, everything's great. The pink cloud, they call it. The idea that once sober, you're kind of like, everything is, because actually that's when the work starts every day you wake up. You don't know, as a recovering alcoholic or addict, when you open your eyes, whether you for sure are going to get to the end of that day fully sober. And when I say that you might not get to the end of the day sober, I don't mean that you might pick up a drink or even take a drug. For me, the true meaning of alcoholism is you can be an alcoholic, you can be an addict, you can have the ism of alcoholism or addiction and not pick up a drop of anything or take anything. You can be struggling with it. It can have a grip on you. It can define your life. You can behave in an alcoholic fashion without a drop of alcohol in you. In assessment, what did I think of this film? Did it work for me? It didn't tell me, the difficulty is when you've been nearly 20 years sober, it didn't tell me anything I didn't already know. I think at times, perhaps, not that I was disappointed, but I thought it could have possibly explored in a little bit more detail even the kind of contradictions and the inner turmoil and the highs and lows of what one goes through in order to stay sober. Of course it deals with all of those things. I think it sometimes was overly sort of fidgety in terms of its non-linearness. I could have done with a couple of scenes where we just sat with her for a bit longer. I quite liked the extended scene towards the end where she was absolutely in a hut, where she's gone to an even more remote part of the Orkney Isles on her own. I liked the way it didn't romanticise the landscape. It was bleak, it was harsh, and in a way that's the point. The point of recovery is, we can easily get ourselves into thinking that if I go to this place and sort myself out, I will be sorted. They call it in 12-step recovery or in rehab. The geographicals. Oh, if I go here, I'll feel better. This will sort me out. But if what you discover is you go there and the same you is there, so nothing's got any better. It's the geographicals. Nothing about your exterior is going to change anything. You've got to change it within. And I think where this film was at its strongest was where it was putting us in her head. It did that a lot through the use of the music that she was listening to on her headphones. And, you know, she wasn't finding sustenance from the landscape. The landscape was actually pretty damn barren. It was hostile. At the centre of this, Saoirse Ronan is absolutely sensational. And I think the danger for anyone who's been in recovery as long as I have is I can't get too much of the getting into the dark stuff and the inherent difficulties of staying sober. And really, for me, the big story is always about how do you stay sober? What happened next? I always want to know what happens next, you know, in her story, because we've seen her get to this point of sobriety. There's a very neat, I won't spoil it, there's a very neat sort of gag, if you like, at the end of something she hears right at the end of the film, which is quite funny. All the performances are great. I think it managed to avoid most of the pitfalls that anything like this ends up inevitably falling down, of romanticising or idolising or sort of sentimentalising, if you like, the idea of sobriety. It wasn't at all sentimental about getting sober. It involves slogging it out across granite sort of bits of rock. You're slogging. It's a marathon. It's not pretty. It's not beautiful. It's gritty. It's dull. It's pretty samey, and it's quite depressing. You know, one of the most important things to know is to get sober can be depressing, but what you mustn't forget is getting drunk and getting high after the initial drunkenness and highness is also extraordinarily depressing too, and this film shows both sides of that. Saoirse Ronan is always so eminently watchable. She was sensational. Paapa Essiedu was captivating as a partner. Heartbreaking scenes between the two of them as their relationship, you know, falls apart and struggles beneath the weight of alcoholism and her behaviour and her regret. You see scenes, and again the added detail actually, which is different for me, of course, of being a young woman who's struggling with addictions, is the vulnerability and the vulnerable situation she finds herself in regards to men. And again, that was dealt with and handled very powerfully. And in a very ungratuitous fashion. So it was inferred and it was seen, and you got a sense of how she was exploited and taken advantage of. Certainly not a film that you're going to watch and kind of come out going, hey, that was, you know, a really kind of inspiring story of sobriety. I think it's just a very honest and very real, you know, quite abstract at times portrait. And in fact, the end montage of this film is incredibly sort of, some have said they find it a little bit cliched maybe. I liked it. I thought it was a nice pull together of all those moments, the shards, the fractured moments of kind of regret, the joy of dancing, and the fact that she still holds on to this dance music that she still likes, she still wants to listen to. I liked all of that too. If I was to score it, I'd probably give it... I'd give it 73 out of 100. I thought it was a touch long, and really, I'm a pain in the arse of a viewer for this kind of thing, really, because I could have gone into much more detail. I really enjoyed the scene with Nabil. I thought we could have had even more exploration of what it means to be sober, and when the other guy that she meets at an AA meeting, when he says it's not that it gets easier, it's just less hard. You know, we could have gone into that a bit more, I thought.